How are you, people? Yeah, anywho. Just so you guys know, I can't really see anything or read the chat as it's going. So if it looks like I have to like stop and come around and look, you'll understand why. So it's Saturday, good Saturday afternoon actually. I'm about 25-30 minutes behind on starting this, so my apologies. I had to run to the store and make sure I had everything that I needed, and here we are doing a dinner prep and a dialectic. Dinner time dialectics, I suppose. But yeah, if you don't know who I am, I'm TC, and this is my channel, Minnesota Black Robe Regiment, or Minnesota or MBRR Pod, whichever one. So yeah, that's what we got going on here, and some of you are familiar with my drive time dialectics. I don't know. Hold on a second. Let's see if we can get this closer. Yes, TC can cook. Shut up, ABA. I will metaphorically punch you in your metaphorically ugly nose. But yeah. Jugs is here. I swear sometimes you guys have more fun talking to each other than you do listening to me. So yeah, share this out. Get other people watching. Get other people to enjoy the stream and share the stream, and then come back after the stream and share the stream as a video. Brandon's here. Hey guys, everybody's saying hello. But yeah, that's what I'm here for, is your guys' entertainment. I guarantee you at some point, I will hit my head on that, which is why I moved the table to do this, because normally I'm standing right over it. So, yeah. If you get, well, I got actually several of you. TC can appear to cook, but have we tasted his cooking? No, and it's comments like that will make sure you never do. Thanks a lot, 507. I know who you are. I know where you are. But anyway, yeah, so what on earth is my reasoning for this today? And I scared somebody away. I had 5 viewers, and now I'm back down again. We're not starting with the onions. Actually, we're going to start with this. And we're not going to read the whole thing, but we're gonna read a section from the beginning section of the Declaration of Independence. This is very important, so bear with me here. I don't know why I'm saying bear with me. You guys should love this. This is right up everybody's alley. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitled them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends. It is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundations on such principles and organizing its power in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. All right, now we're getting. He doesn't have a receding hairline. He has a protruding. You know what, Jugs? You're fired. I was being all serious there, and that's how you treats me. But yeah, that is the opening salvo, if you will, of the Declaration of Independence. And it's really important because as we're learning, people don't really know these things anymore. They don't understand them. I don't know if they don't care to understand them or care to delve into them as much. But it's a constant refrain in the United States right now, as we're heating up into an election cycle, that we are to look to the past, to presidents of the past. And the things that they stood for and the things that they espoused. And the problem is that they turn to people in recent years, especially, and they think of people like Reagan, or maybe you don't lean Republican and you mention somebody like Clinton. I don't know. I can't name a president that I really, in my life now, looking back, that I would call great. And the last chance we had for a great president in the United States was Kennedy. And we know what they did to him. And Kennedy even had a lot of problems. But the old throwback, and what you see, and you guys, some of you have heard me talk about this before, whether it be over on my Facebook or it's here. A lot of you have heard me talk about how the left and the right, the Republicans and the Democrats, which by the way are not the left and the right, as many of us are well aware, they're one bird, two different wings, birds flying in the same direction. It's just taking its own sweet time getting there, which, I don't mind it slowing down. So if we could hobble the bird, that'd be great. But the two parties that make up the duopoly, that make up the uniparty, they all love Lincoln, right? You're not allowed to talk poorly of Lincoln. You're not allowed to question the great emancipator. You're not allowed to indicate in any way, shape, or form that the great emancipator is nothing less than a saint. You're not allowed to question the legitimacy of what he did. And when you do, you're immediately labeled a racist. And on and on and on. But the problem that I have is less with people's defense of him, but it's their lack of understanding of the history of the United States. And it's really their lack of depth. And I was there once. I mean, I revered Abraham Lincoln. But I was taught that, like all of you, I was taught that Abraham Lincoln was the greatest president. He was better than Jefferson. He was better than Washington. He was better than, well, even, dare I say, FDR, who so many people revere. And it took me independent study. I'm autodidactic. I'm a self-teacher, and I don't do well in a forced learning environment. And that's the case for a lot of people, which is why I'm such an advocate for home education, whether you're a Christian or an atheist or whatnot. Home education is really the only way that you can go to ensure that your children are not being more indoctrinated than society already indoctrinates them. And when you do that, when you home educate, you can really delve into sources that your kids are never going to get exposed to in government-run centers of indoctrination. And yes, it is Velveeta. It's the only time you will ever see me use a processed cheese is for this particular dish that I'm making. I make a queso dip that is absolutely the bomb. It's better than anything you've ever had anywhere else. And I actually use Velveeta for it. Because it's true, Velveeta melts different. But yeah, it's a phenomenal. But anyway. So we have this misunderstanding of Lincoln, and we have a Lincolnian view of history. Sadly, not just the history after Lincoln leading up to today, but we even have a Lincolnian view of history predating Lincoln, because we have been taught wrongly that Lincoln was operating off a historical perspective of the preservation of the Union. And even that term, the Union, is foreign in concept to the United States. Do you ever hit your head on those pots or on those pans? Yes, which is why I moved the table. So when I'm really getting into the cutting that's coming up here, you might see me. I'll probably hit my head. Oh, and by the way, if you like the content and you're not a member yet, and you want to see me hit my head, you should go over and join. Hit the join tab and become a member of the channel, because that would be good for you and me and everyone else. Trust me, it's true. I've not lied to you yet. I'm not always right. I'm not always I'm not always a good guy, to be honest with you. I'm kind of a terrible person. Which is why I'm better on video than I am in person. But yeah. Anyway, so yeah, we have this very Lincolnian view of history. We have a very Lincolnian perspective on what makes for a proper view of the war between the states and what Lincoln had to do to preserve the Union. And as I was saying, there was no perspective that there was even a union. There was the Republic, and that's it. And there's also no historical perspective that teaches that we are a nation. A nation is an ethnos. And I mentioned this at other times. Nation is ethnos, which comes from the, which is where we get the word ethnic, excuse me. And so when we have this Lincolnian view, we end up with things like the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag, on and on and on. I don't even say it anymore, by the way, because the origins of the Pledge of Allegiance are Marxist. They were written by a socialist. It was written by a socialist to instill socialistic ideals in school children and in the population as a whole. And so I don't even say the pledge. I rarely, when you hear me, I won't disrespect others, but you will not hear me sing the national anthem. I know it probably sounds a little Jehovah's Witness-ish, but it's not. There are other reasons for it. It's kind of like veterans, and AVA's in here, and he'll back me up on this. It's kind of like veterans who get uncomfortable when people come up and go, "Oh man, thank you for your service. You're such a hero." It just, I will still use "thank you for your service" when talking to other vets that I do not know, but it's cringy for me, and I don't always know the perspective of the other vet that I'm talking to. So sometimes saying, "Hey, thanks for your service. I see you're a vet. You're wearing that DAV hat. You're wearing that Vietnam Veterans hat. You're wearing something that indicates that you served," especially you Marines out there. You Marines know what I'm talking about. Oh, and by the way, when you cook with peppers, green peppers, red peppers, yellow peppers, jalapenos, Anaheims, anything like that, when you cook with peppers, this part right here, I only remove the stem as much as possible. I leave as much of the seed in because it's where all the capsaicin is, even in a mild green pepper. Sometimes it doesn't work the way I want it to, but I leave that white in, especially with the seed. But yeah, a lot of my fellow vets will back me up on this. If you know us, we don't need you to thank us for our service. We don't really need you to say anything to us on Veterans Day. Memorial Day is a really good day for you to remember the veterans of the United States, because those are the ones that didn't come home. And we need a second Memorial Day for all of the people who came home, but it took their lives after they came home, because they are victims of the war machine, and those are the people we should be looking to. But anyway, as I was saying, our country wasn't ever intended to be viewed as a nation. It was always intended to be viewed as a republic. It was also never intended to be viewed as a union. And while the brunt of my conversation today has very little to do with the difference between a nation and a country and a union, I bring those things up because they're vitally important to the understanding of why the war between the states, the war of northern aggression, was so important. Because a lot of people really do have this heroic perspective of the North, this heroic perspective of Lincoln, and the heroic perspective of all things that the Unionists did. And it's wrong-headed. See, the reason why, and some of you are going to hate me, and keep in mind, like I said, I was a Lincolnian. I loved Lincoln. I didn't know any better. But the reason why the South left, the southern states left, had nothing ultimately to do with racism. And I know everybody disagrees with me on that. A lot of people get really mad when I say it had next to nothing. But it really, Southern racism did not motivate the Southerners to leave. The owning of slaves had very little to do with Southern secession. In fact, when you look at the propensity of wealth, most of it being focused in the North, Um, Southerners, by and large, were poor, did not own slaves, and had no desire to own slaves. They were subsistence farmers. They wanted to live in their communities. They wanted to work in their communities. They wanted to provide food for their families. And they wanted to trade with others in their community. That's it. That's all they really wanted. That's all it was all about. And so when we accuse the South of leaving the Union because they wanted to keep slaves and make that war of Northern aggression, the war between the states, nothing about a war on slavery, then we're actually doing a disservice to not just Southerners, but we're actually doing a disservice to the slaves who were enslaved in the United States at the time. And you have to remember that there were slaves in the North, and nobody was moving to free the slaves in the North outside of some very strong abolitionist minds like libertarian philosopher and thinker Lysander Spooner. And Spooner was an abolitionist. Like, he was a hardcore abolitionist, but he was also against aggression to ending slavery. And he supported the South in its move to secede because he saw the handwriting on the wall and knew that any move to, shall we say, prevent the breaking of the Union would also end in the breaking of the Republic. And so Spooner was very, very, very opposed to the Northern effort to prevent the South from leaving and forming its own republic, its own confederacy. And keep in mind, the term confederacy does not, so many people, they hear that word confederacy. Well, the United States was a confederacy. The very first foundational document that the United States governed under were Articles of Confederation. And it's powerfully important for us to remember that. But anyway, as I was saying, so secession, and the reason I'm talking about secession is because a lot of people are talking about it today. They are very much talking about it today. Jugs, what did you say that you needed to take down? Are you ashamed of something? Anyways. So, yeah. The people in the States right now, especially the more conservative, right of center, even libertarian types are talking about withdrawing, seceding from the Union. Like there's talk about something like Texit, and there's talk of other states joining in on Texit if Texas decides it wants to leave the republic. I mean, and think about it, Texas is still a republic. There are people that still talk about Texas as a republic. It's not just merely a state. I listen to 10th Amendment, read stuff in the 10th Amendment Center. Absolutely. Love their work. I'm working on getting them on the show for Libertarian Lowdown or TC and Friends Monday Night Musings. So stay tuned for that. But anyway, the topic of secession, the conversation of secession is really out there. It's on people's minds, and people are talking about what's it look like if we continue to lose our republic the way we're used to it. And sadly, I tell people I think that we have lost the republic already. I we lost it under Lincoln. So, spoiler alert. Um, we lost it under the Republican Party of Lincoln, and especially under the radical Republicans. And so, there are people talking about what do we do? How do we go about preserving what we have or rescuing what we have? And it kind of ties into this desire on the part of many to talk about MAGA, make America great again. And I understand that. I understand why people talk about make America great again. And the problem with that is their throwback is often to days of yore, right? Boy, and how many of them do I hear talking about Lincoln? Oh man, if we could just go back to the country, the nation as it was under Lincoln and what he did to save the republic. And that's where you lose the plot. Because as you remember, I read straight from the opening paragraphs of the Declaration of Independence, where it said that it's a natural right of man when they find themselves being governed in such a way that it's unbearable and is hostile to the pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness. And note in there too, it even said safety. Now, their idea of safety was not, being protected from some sort of, virus. Like, their idea of safety was being protected from tyrannical rule, from living. You heard Lincoln is a vampire hunter. You know what? AVA, put yourself in timeout. That was terrible, and I want you on a 10-second timeout. So make it happen. But yeah. So what we saw in the Declaration of Independence was not like they weren't the penners of the Declaration of Independence. They weren't sitting there saying this is only for us. They were saying like this is, for lack of better terminology, this is belongs to all men. And when I say men, you guys know who and what I'm talking about. That belongs to all peoples. Yeah, you didn't get to see that time. I know you're watching and waiting. And so that's why they withdrew from the Empire of Great Britain. They had no desire to remain in that rule, to remain under the thumb of an empire that had no desire for them yeah, you learn how to put yourself in the timeout. Oh, I love you, AVA. You know that. I love all of you guys. I mean that. But as I was saying, they were indicating in the Declaration of Independence, like, we're separating from you, Great Britain. We don't want this to be hostile. We know it's going to be a war, but we don't want it to be a war. We just want you to know that our... Do not drop the tomatoes while you're trying to make something. The chef will be very upset. And by the way, if you don't know, this little bowl right here, it's for chickens. And I know many of you were just drawn in because of the chicken in the thumbnail. I did that on purpose. I know. I did what I did. Are you no, you're back, Jugs. I had to put AVA in a timeout. So But so yeah, they were acknowledging in the Declaration of Independence, we're doing this because we have a natural right, like all other men, whether you believe in God or not. And that's why they're very clear: the God of creation, nature's God, or um, this amorphous idea that nature, natural rights, dictate what is ours. No government, no monarch, no Congress, no anything has that authority, has that power to make that determination, to make that decision for us. And they were securing that legacy for themselves and for future generations. Which, by the way, the Declaration of Independence is why TC is adamantly opposed to American interventionism around the world. As much as I want other people to live free, as much as I want other people to live a libertarian, anarcho-capitalistic lifestyle, the United States of America, one, is not equipped to take democracy around the world at the point of a gun. Two, if others choose to rise up and push against their overlords, that's their decision. It's not the decision of the United States. It's not the decision of the military-industrial complex. It's not the duty of the American people to force our brand of freedom on other people. It flies in the face of the very reason our country, and there again, I hate using that term, but so many people are used to it. It flies in the face of why the U.S. is even in existence today. And that's why I oppose intervention in Ukraine. That's why I oppose intervention in Israel. We have no business being involved in what's going on in Israel. We have no business being involved in what's going on in the Middle East or in Eastern Europe or anywhere in Asia or South America or Central America. We just don't. We shouldn't have. We have a vested interest in securing our border with Canada and Mexico because we don't want people importing their ideals that are antithetical to the ideals of our founding fathers into our country on the backs of our tax wage slaves. See, I know that a lot of people think that I'm just some sort of Johnny-come-lately to a lot of this conversation, but I've been thinking about these things for a very, very long time. Hey, Chad, good to see you. Chad's been thinking about these probably even longer than I have, maybe twice as long as I have. And he has some different perspectives on things compared to me. But he's a deep thinker, like all of you guys are, really. But as I was saying, the Declaration of Independence is why I believe so much of what I believe. Honestly, I think the Declaration of Independence, more than anything else, is a deeper, more foundational document, a collection of writings as it regards the self-governance of we the people than even the Constitution. And as so many people are off quoting now, and I like to paraphrase because I got so many things going on in my head that giving you an exact reference sometimes is really hard. But to the off-quoted Lysander Spooner, the American Constitution was either never intended to do what we were told it was intended to do, or it's wholly inadequate to do what we were told it was supposed to do. And while I will point to people and say, look, our highest governing authority in the United States by the law is the Constitution. It's got more power, more authority than the president, than Congress, of the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, of anybody. But the Declaration of Independence is the bedrock of that document. It was the bedrock of the Articles of Confederation that were first put in place right after we won the war to be free from the Empire of Great Britain. You guys almost got to see a big mistake right there. If you hear stifled cursing and blood-curdling screams at the same time, you'll know I hacked off the tip of a finger. So that would probably mean I would get the channel demonetized. Surprised it hasn't been already. But as it regards secession and its future here in the United States, we have no hope of secession. No state, no matter how fed up it gets, no matter how many people fleeing Marxist revolutions in places like California and Minnesota and New York and New Jersey and Michigan and other places, no matter how much people are fleeing those and going to states where they think they're going to have what they call freedom, we're never going to have secession again, because people do not understand secession as a natural right. They see secession, they see the American War for Independence. They call it a revolution. And by the way, it was not a revolution. Definitionally, what the United States fought against Great Britain was not a revolution. A revolution is a desire to overturn in upheaval an entire form of governance and take control of a nation for yourself. And the Founding Fathers did not want to fight a revolution. The Founding Fathers had no desire to take over Great Britain, had no desire to take on and become the leaders, if you will, the rulers of the British Empire. They wanted self-governance. They wanted self-determination. So it was strictly a war for independence. It was a war, ultimately, to preserve and protect and defend natural rights. You don't have to believe me. You don't have to agree with me, but you're wrong if you don't. And now, that doesn't mean everything that they did was good. I think they made a lot of mistakes in writing the Constitution. They made a lot of mistakes in ratifying the Constitution. Jefferson warned them from afar, and a lot of, and I know people are like, well, Madison wrote the Constitution, and we had, so-and-so involved with this aspect, and so-and-so involved with that aspect, and you still have to understand that it was Jeffersonians, known as the Anti-Federalists. And that's a very long and a very interesting conversation that maybe we'll have sometime. But the Anti-Federalists were warning in the ratification of the Constitution as it was written and ran across to all of the 13 original free and sovereign states. The Anti-Federalists were warning, hey guys, this isn't going to work. What you're doing is creating a monster, and you're going to lose what we fought the war for. And they were terrified of that exact the exact outcome that we see today. They were terrified of a strong central power that would seize more and more power to itself as time goes on. And that's what they were warning about. And the days of the ratification of the Constitution. There again, compared to them, I am a John come lately, because it took me a lot of studying, a lot of digging, a lot of work to understand just how much of what they were fighting against in the ratification of the Constitution as it is wasn't about despising the document. It was about wanting to ensconce more protections into the Constitution for the people to keep a strong central government from taking over. I know a lot of people are going, what are you talking about? Like, that, that just happened. Like, it happened, but it was because, in the eyes of the Jeffersonians, it was built in to the Constitution with almost intentionally. Because there were people, the not anti-federalist, who were arguing for a stronger centralized government. And so a lot of what's happening in the Republic of the United States today is a direct result of the anti-federalists not being listened to. And so, as we went through the early history of the United States leading up to the Civil War, there were fights about, who's going to be in charge of what. How are we going to, look at the Interstate Commerce Clause, right? Like, the federal government could, according to the Interstate Commerce Clause, and Chad's an expert on some of this right here. The federal government, the federal state's responsibility was to ensure fair commerce between the states, for lack of better terminology. Hamiltonian versus Jeffersonian democracy. Guess who lost? Yeah, well, you're not wrong, good citizen. And we're all the worst off for it. Yeah, we would have. You know what? I won't say. There was a certain event that took place that we would have all been much better off if Hamilton hadn't won. Let's just put it that way. I said what I said. What's going on back here? I got a notification that somebody was moving around the backyard. Must be the chickens. But anywho, if you guys see me reach for my face, tell me to stop, because these are fresh jalapenos. So yeah. So, going through the early history of the United States, there was this constant Hamiltonian versus Jeffersonian perspective on things, and it was a problem because there was a lot of back and forth, a lot of disagreement about what would be good for the U.S. and what wouldn't be good for the U.S. And thank you, everybody, for checking in. I really appreciate you guys sharing this out and taking part. And so, as tensions began to rise between the North and the South, it had very little to do with slavery. Now, I'm not going to say that there weren't abolitionists in the North. Now you want me to... You don't want to look at my face? All right. Let's see. See what we can do here. Everybody's so demanding. I don't know. Is that better? Is that better? Are you happy now? All right. So there were tensions that were rising between the North and the South. Some of it was driven by the abolitionist movement, but there were abolitionists in the South too, folks. You have to remember that. There were abolitionists in the South. And abolition was moving across the world at the time. While abolition was taking place in the United States, abolitionists in Europe, especially in Great Britain, I can't remember his name right now. I'm very embarrassed that I can't. But there was an abolitionist in Great Britain who managed to end slavery in all of the British Empire without a single drop of blood being shed, without a single shot being fired by any military force on the part of Great Britain. They ended slavery in all of their empire and all their colonies all over without so much as a single shot being fired. Hey, old guy Mitch. Good to see you. Good citizens here. Mama G is here. I'm really glad all you guys are stopping in. I'm always glad when everybody stops in. But yeah, Wilberforce. That was his name. Wilberforce. Wilberforce based his abolitionism on his strong Calvinistic roots. And that was where the roots of abolition in the South were coming from, was a strong adherence to Calvinistic Calvinistic theology in the Southern Church. And many of the Southern landowners had already released their slaves from captivity because of their belief and having come to a realization and come to grips with the reality that the slaves were their brothers, as the Northern War Song. Well, never mind. Anyway, but so as Wilberforce and others, John Newton amongst them, were fighting to end slavery in the British Empire, the North was pushing for more aggressive tactics in other ways, but they were also doing things to the southern states that were just reprehensible, because the agrarian South was responsible for feeding the North. And they were putting massive amounts of financial burden on the southern states that they just could not recover from. And then the issue of slavery began to come up. And the North argued, look, we can't compete with the South because the South has more slaves, so it's not fair to us that the South is able to do what it does and have no competition like we do. But see, the South there was something the North had that the South didn't have, and that was industrialization, technology, if you will. So as technology grew in the North, trains and automation of factories, and not like automation that we see today, but automation of being able to have industrial, like weaving and sewing and means of production. The South just didn't have the money to keep up with that, so the South was losing out a lot. Gotta check the pot. And so the only thing that the South had going for it in that regard was the ability to produce the crops and the foods that the Northerners were so readily and heavily dependent on. They produced the cotton that the Northerners needed. And so there was this constant battle happening between the North and South already, where the North was taking advantage of the South because they had the wealth, they had the means of production. And the only thing that the South had was the ability to produce the raw products. And Northern abolitionists wanted to exact revenge on the Southerners by taking away their workforce. It's terrible, folks. Slavery is terrible. What's going on? Interesting. People are having subbing issues. Well, I hope if any of you are subbed and you know that if you're not subbed, I didn't do it. But anyway. So there were basically embargoes and tariffs and just a massive economic issue. And I'm boiling this way down. I don't mean that you guys are too simple to understand. But there were all these things were happening, and then the South sees its ability to provide for itself, and of course I'm painting with a very broad brush. The South sees its ability to provide for itself dwindling away because they can't keep up with what the North wants. They're not getting paid fairly by the North for their products. And so then the drive to end slavery, which is a good thing, heats up. What's good citizens say the Industrial Revolution was late to come to the U.S., even later to the South. Yep. Most of the cotton was sold in England. This is why warning aid to the South in the war. Yep. Yeah. Great Britain loved Southern cotton. And a lot of times the North relied on cotton from other places because of the disagreements between the North and the South. And so the North was moving to hurt the South as much as possible. And then it was, we're moving to end slavery. And the South didn't have the means to catch up with the Industrial Revolution the way that the North did. North had the vast majority of ports. And the North even had all-year ports. There were ports in the North that could stay open. But the South clearly had, year-round ports. And so, as decisions were made in courts and decisions were made in, by executive order and on and on and on, the South finally said enough is enough, and they started to leave. But that didn't happen under Lincoln. That's not where this stuff was happening. A lot of this happened under Calhoun, while Calhoun was president. And Calhoun opposed secession. He didn't want the southern states to leave because he saw that the republic would be weaker with fewer states in compact with each other. And if you guys have never studied compact theory, it's actually compact fact. Brian McClanahan is a wonderful source, a teacher on compact theory, compact fact. And I would strongly encourage you to listen to his works on that. But the South had started to practice nullification and said, look, some of the stuff that you're ordering us to do, we just don't have to do. You don't have the constitutional authority to tell us to do it. And then when nullification didn't work and they started to get told, no, you're going to do this whether you like it or not, then the South said, well, fine. Because we are cooperative members of this republic, we have reserved for ourselves, according to the very Declaration of Independence, the right to leave. So we're leaving. And they left. And Calhoun, as opposed to it as he was, refused to raise a single finger to prevent, by force, the dissolution of the republic. And And people were mad at him for it, but it was the right decision. And Lincoln ultimately ended up winning election because he promised to prevent it, for lack of better terminology. He wrote checks in his campaign, philosophically, based on a power that he took to himself that he just didn't have, according to the Constitution. In fact, constitutionally, slavery was still legal. There had been no amendment at the time to end slavery, because not even the northern states were on board with the constitutional amendment, which is what it would have taken to end slavery. So northern states still had slaves. And southern states pointed that out. And there was basically, there again to sum it all up, it came down to, if you want to end slavery, then let's have a constitutional amendment. And nobody wanted to have a constitutional amendment. Because what a lot of people don't understand, and I've said this already in other streams, other shows, and I've said today, the Northerners were far more racist than the South. While there were northern states, admitted to the Union, by the way, after the war started, actually controlled by the Union, who were not forced to give up their states. There were northern states, New England states, that had slaves that did not and were not required to give up their slaves. But admittedly so, the slave population in the South was far larger proportionally than what was in the North. But Northerners didn't want to see slaves. Northerners wanted nothing at all to do with black men. They did not want black people in their states. Lincoln was all on board with putting every freed black man on a boat back to Africa. That was what he wanted to do. If you don't believe me, you need to go read Thomas DiLorenzo's book on Lincoln, and you will see that one of his aspirations was to get all black men out of North America. He wanted all blacks, all slaves, whether they were born here and had never stepped foot in their homeland, if you will. Lincoln wanted them all gone back. He saw no place for the survival of the black race, of the black ethnicity in America. And he was an avowed racist. He was a terrible racist. A good friend of mine is, I want to say he's pretty much full-blooded Cherokee, despises Lincoln because he knows how racist Lincoln was. And Lincoln was responsible for ordering the hanging, the largest mass hanging in the history of the United States, here in Minnesota, I think it was, of Native Americans, because he declared them guilty and of a massacre and had them all hung, just arbitrarily, unilaterally just declared it, got and hung them. So Lincoln was not this peaceful paragon of virtue. Lincoln was a monster. And Lincoln wanted the power over the southern states, and the only way that he could have the power over the southern states that he wanted to keep them in check was to destroy their ability to conduct, for lack of better terminology, agorism, in that agrarian lifestyle, and their independence, and that would at that time was to take away their slaves from them. And it was so bad that when he, and I know everybody's, the Emancipation Proclamation was a beautiful thing. It literally wasn't. It was a weapon, is all it was. What's back? Yeah, absolutely. It did hurt them. AVA, what part is crazy? Like, I want you guys, if you guys are hearing some of this and you're saying, like, hey, TC, you're freaking nuts. I thought all this stuff too at first. I was like, man, this is crazy. And then I started doing the research. I started reading. Finally, somebody that's not black saying the same things I tell people. Yeah. I hope you guys will share this with other people, and because I do want to hear from people who disagree with me. I do. I know that I can come off as pretty pig-headed and stubborn, and if any of you were watching, I stopped in on Wednesday night's panel, towards the end of their panel on Vigilance Committee, because they had a guy on who I know they like and respect, but he was just espousing some just utter stupidity. And I was pretty hard-headed. I was pretty hot about that. You guys want me to call my dog in here? You want to meet my dog? Yeah, AVA. Everybody thinks that. Calvin, come here. You want a pepper? Calvin, you want a treat? No, he's sound asleep. He's dreaming, so he doesn't want to come in and see you guys. More tomato, I think. So let's see. Old guys on black robe. I heard these stories from my great grandmother. Man, I'd love to talk to you sometime, man. So yeah, where was I? Oh yeah. So they wanted to punish the South, and Lincoln was all on board with punishing the South. He really wanted to destroy the South. He wanted to take away their means of production. And so that's what he did. And so he declares the Emancipation Proclamation, basically saying, how dare you upstart rebels. And remember, they're not rebels. They had a natural right to secede. In the foundational documents of the Republic, they acknowledged, the founders acknowledged secession as a natural right of man. And it didn't matter what the reason for secession was. Any state at any time could secede. There was nothing preventing them from secession. And Calhoun recognized that. Lincoln didn't. And ironically, even though Lincoln didn't recognize it, he had said at different times that he agreed with it. And once again, I would point you to guys like Thomas DiLorenzo to understand that, or Brian McClanahan. And these guys will, they will set you straight because they bring their receipts. And the reason that I know that they're telling the truth is because I did the work for myself, found all this stuff out on my own, and then I started to read them because I thought I was losing my cotton picking mind. That was not scripted. Just want you, that was not scripted. Oh gosh, I'm a terrible human being. Oh, I just said cotton picking mind. Yeah, cotton picking mind. I have a lot of Southern friends and family, so your cotton picking mind comes out pretty easily sometimes. So it was not intended. I was not intending that to be part of the show, folks. So Lincoln at one time had acknowledged secession as a reality, and most of the states had. In fact, a lot of people don't know this, but a lot of the northern states had regionally considered seceding from the Republic as well over different issues. And in fact, there was a movement among abolitionists in the Northeast to secede from the Republic because they didn't want to be associated with the Southern states, because that's how much they despised slavery. So instead of starting a war with the South, many of the northern states wanted to just leave so that they could form their own non-slave holding nation, or republic, which they had every right to do. They were eventually talked out of it, but there was talk well before the South ever talked about secession. There was talk in the North of it. And so that's where, Lincoln comes in, declares that secession was unlawful, could not cite any constitutional authority that he had to declare it unlawful. He just declared it unlawful, and then began to prosecute a war against the South, starting with embargoes. And when I mean embargoes, I mean he cut off Charleston from trade. He was going to starve out Charleston. That was his goal. He was going to starve out Charleston. And of course, we know that the story of Fort Sumter, or do we? We don't really know the story of Fort Sumter, because it was on South Carolinian property. It was that land that Fort Sumter sat on was owned by South Carolina. And while the states were seceding, South Carolina had sent a delegation to Washington, D.C. as ambassadors to buy not the island or the land, but to buy the fort, to pay the North for the materials used to build the fort. Did you know that? Didn't know that, did you? I mean, some of you might have, but that's a fact. They were negotiating it in good faith. The delegation was negotiating in good faith with the North to pay them for the fort, even though it was theirs by right. It was their land. And so the North, under Lincoln's guidance, refused. And so Lincoln was provoking the South. And in the case of the shots being fired on Fort Sumter, Northern troops were going in every day into Charleston and hanging out and doing commerce and spending time with the Southern states, the people in the Southern states. They were effectively an occupying force in the South, and they were still going in and spending time with these people because they knew them. They were neighbors for the longest time. And so when Southern commanders had finally said enough's enough, we're going to take the fort back, they gave announcement and said, look, we're firing on the fort tomorrow. 24 hours notice. They gave the Northern troops 24 hours notice, and the Northern troops all withdrew from the fort. And then the South fired on it, and it was only the day after the first firing that one Northern soldier was killed in an accident. I think it was with unexploded ordnance. And that's what Lincoln took to the newspapers. Lincoln took that story to the newspapers and said that the South had fired the first shots and that they were guilty for the death of one of their Northern boys. Don't believe me? Look up the history. And oh, by the way, when the Northerners fled the fort, you know where they fled to? Charleston. You know what they did? They hung out with the Southerners. And then after that, they withdrew, and the South marched in and they took Fort Sumter with one casualty on the part of the North. Could you please state in the description what article works that will explain all of this? Teresa, I will try to remember to put the name of the book by DiLorenzo, Thomas DiLorenzo in there. I think it's The Real Lincoln. but that's really kind of a definitive source that you can read, or if you read through audio, it is available through like Audible. And there are other books out there, and there are other podcasts, and so I'll gladly try and put the effort in. I say things all the time, like I'll go put this in the description, and then I get busy with some other project and I forget. And I don't do that because I don't respect you guys. I do it because I just forget. So, because I'm normally doing something like driving home from my work day or cooking or something. But yeah, anyway. Oh, almost. You guys almost got it. You almost got your money's worth. Speaking of which, I hope that you guys are sharing this out, and I hope that you are liking. Looks like we're getting a few likes, but yeah, I hope you guys are sharing this out and telling other people to watch it. So, what's TC's point in all of this? If you go back to the foundational document, if you go back to the Declaration of Independence, our founding fathers recognized the right, the natural right, endowed by our Creator, the natural rights of man, this abstract of what the natural rights are. And when I say abstract, it's a technical term basically in philosophy that says that there's a source for this, and the source, this abstract, is primary. It is, for lack of better terminology, this exists. It's what it is. And natural rights are an abstract. They are, because nature says it is. And so part of that natural right is the natural right of people who are in union, in compact with each other, when they are being abused by their government, when they're being persecuted and prosecuted and taken advantage of and enslaved by their government. They have a natural right to rise up against that, rebel against it, and secede. It's the foundation of our country. It's the very foundation of our republic. It's what makes our republic great. It isn't like the Bill of Rights, those first 10 amendments, right? They're codified as natural rights outside of the Bill of Rights. We don't need the Bill of Rights to know that we have a right to a freedom of expression. We don't need the Bill of Rights to know that we have a right to freedom of assembly. We don't need a Bill of Rights to know that we have a right to petition our government for a redress of grievances. We don't need a Bill of Rights to know that we are free to practice religion in any way that doesn't harm others. That's a natural right that belongs to us. It's a natural right that is ours, not because the government has, the state has said, oh yes, we've granted you this. It's the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, the Third Amendment. Not having troops quartered in your home. Don't laugh. I'm going to be honest with you. I think it might be coming. The right to defense of self by the use of whatever means necessary to throw off the chains that enslave us, the chains that abuse us, the chains that fight to take away our natural rights. That Second Amendment doesn't grant you those rights. Those rights belong to you. Those things belong to you. The right of to have a free press, the right of you to be part of the press, the right of you to speak against your government. Not to advocate violence towards others, but to advocate against the violence, the usurpation of our rights by a government that has determined, by the state which has determined that it has a sole monopoly on force. Tell me I'm wrong. Like, these things belong to us, and the Constitution and the Bill of Rights don't grant them to us. The Constitution, as we all know, limits the power of government. Was supposed to, right? But we see how well that works. And the Bill of Rights delineates for us what natural rights we already have. They belong to us. Not because we are Americans in the Republic of America, but they belong to us because nature says these are inherent to you as human beings. And secession is one of those. And so when I look at you and I tell you, or I tell others, or now maybe you will begin to look at these things and think on these things for yourself. When I tell you that Lincoln was a tyrant who ultimately had as his goal the destruction of those things and the preservation of a centralized power and a centralized authority for the sake of keeping those things away from you, and I look you in the eye, metaphorically speaking here, as you watch me chop. What do the kids say now? Let them cook? Lincoln didn't free a single slave. What he managed to do was enslave an entire people. Under Lincoln, we lost our republic. Under Lincoln, the road was paved with impenetrable surface material. The road was paved for all of the abuses that we see now. And even though he died, he paved the way, which I think the 13th Amendment is a great amendment. It righted the wrong of slavery in the Constitution of the United States. I believe it's just as I agree with the top 10 of the Bill of Rights, I believe the 13th Amendment was righteous and necessary. There should have never been a slave in this nation. There should have never been a single black man or any other person in this nation, native or the Chinese, the indentured servitude that we saw brought against the Chinese was always wrong. There were white slaves brought in indentured servitude. Like some of them were just purely slaves. Irish, the Irish. People think like the Irish had more in common with the average black man when the Irish began to come here than they did with their other European kin, because most of the Europeans despised the Irish and saw them as less than human. Guys, I forgot I needed to put onions in it, so now it's going to get spicy. The 13th Amendment was necessary because black men and women should have never been in bondage to anyone. And, you know, while the tropes and truisms are tropes and truisms because they're true and they're tropey, I'm sick and tired of hearing people make the argument that blacks need to stop complaining about slavery because their own people sold them into slavery in Africa. Well, I'm glad I bought red onions because these are bad. You can do a lot of things with chickens, but you do not give them bad food. I'm sick and tired of hearing people that consider themselves conservatives have their arguments against reparations being blacks sold blacks into slavery, so they need to get their own reparations. Look, folks, I'm against reparations, but not for the same reasons that others are. I believe that reparations are punishing current generations for the sins of older generations, and I'm adamantly opposed to that. I don't think you punish the children for the sins of the father. I know that there are biblical passages that talk about how the children will pay for the sins of their father, but it's not what people are trying to make it out to be. And so I think going back now and trying to determine how much you should require somebody else to pay you for something that they weren't responsible for is just disgusting and injustice. But I'm also sick and tired of hearing people try to get away from acknowledging just how sinful and terrible slavery was by saying that blacks did it to themselves by selling each other into slavery. Like, you know what? That was their culture, folks. They beat the shit out of each other in these tribal warfare situations, and then they would sell each other off to whoever happened to come along. And it just so happened to come along that the Europeans came in and they offered a lot of things that other places in Africa didn't have. And so, yeah, they sold to the highest bidder. And that's just too bad. Get over it. Stop trying to say that made it okay. Because that's what I hear from a lot of these jackasses. Well, we didn't start it. They started it. Okay, I'm not getting emotional. It's the onions. Yeah, like 40 acres and a mule. Man. Brother, it's good to interact with you. I am getting a little emotional. So, and it's not just the onions. Like, see, I'm about justice. So when people talk to me about reparations, I'm like, that's injustice. That doesn't solve anything. It doesn't help the people who were harmed, and it only harms those who weren't responsible. And it really doesn't help the people who are going to receive it. So I can't remember the tangent or where I was before I went off on this tangent. But ultimately, secession, yeah. But we're never going to make America great again if we don't understand the history of America. And when I say if we don't understand the history of America, I mean not Donald Trump's idea of going back and making America great, whatever that is like 1950? Is it under Reagan? It's got to be more profound than that. It's got to be something that's of value. It has to be something where we go back and we say, can we go back to not when a time where slavery was okay, but can we go back to a time where everybody recognizes, one, that human beings are human beings, and the color or the pallor of their skin, the amount of melanin in their skin is not what makes them more or less human. But can we recognize that people, human beings, are intrinsically worthy of honor and respect and of equality? And can we go back to that time where we were striving to honor and keep the Constitution? That's what we should be looking at. That's the perspective that we should be having. I'm trying to read comments, but sometimes you guys are off on your own discussions. Sometimes I think you talk to each other more than you're listening to me, but that's fine. That's why we do this thing, right? This honestly, this isn't about me. So, if we really want to make America great again, then we have to acknowledge the sins of Abraham Lincoln. Not only do we need to acknowledge the sin of slavery, that was a terrible stain on the United States, but we need to acknowledge the sins of Lincoln. We need to acknowledge the sins of the Northern troops that agreed to take part in the destruction of the Republic by trying to force people into the Republic. And part of that was the ratification of after the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment paved the way for incorporation doctrine to be used against the states and against the people. And prior to the 14th Amendment, the Constitution of the United States applied only to the federal government and not to the states' governments. The states had their own versions, but there was no obligation on the part of the states to adhere to the totality of the federal Constitution. Now, many of them built those things in to, like the First Amendment and the Second Amendment and whatnot. But as we've seen, the federal government doesn't even adhere to a lot of the things in its own constitution. And a lot of that is because Lincoln paved the way for the destruction of those things in a very powerful way. This is the most perilous part of chopping, and this is the most perilous part of dinner time dialectics with TC. It is cutting onions. Ooh. Stand by, folks. That was close. Did you guys see that? That was very close. That was almost an entire fingertip. And the reason it's perilous is not because I'm talking, it's because I can barely see as I'm chopping onion. So when you look at the 14th Amendment, you have to do more than read it and to understand it. You have to understand that the 14th Amendment only became the 14th Amendment because it was forced on the southern states. See, northern troops were sent to occupy any state in the South that refused to incorporate or to ratify the 14th. And a lot of the southern states did not want to ratify the 14th because they saw the danger that was the 14th Amendment. They saw the danger that would become incorporation. And they did not want to lose any more of their freedom and their sovereignty than they had already lost. See, they understood that the fight during the war between the states had very little to do with just purely state rights. It had next to nothing to do with maintaining slavery, and it had everything to do with protecting individual sovereignty, individual freedom and liberty. They understood that better than anybody else did at the time. And so when the 14th Amendment was proposed and put to Congress, and Congress said, yes, let's send this out to the states, and they were saying, oh, we're using this to protect the rights of all people, what the states recognized was that it was an usurpation of the sovereignty of the states, that they were going to lose the ability to govern themselves, that they were going to lose the ability to be free and independent from an overreaching, all-encompassing, overbearing, strong federal and centralized federal state. They knew what was coming, and they were terrified of it. Woo! Onions are strong, folks. Now, you might be asking, TC, why are you scraping onions off the cutting board into another bowl when you have your chicken bowl there? Because I don't give the chickens much for onion. They can eat it; it doesn't hurt them at all, but it can affect the consistency and the palate of the egg if you give them too much for onion. However, things like pepper, on the other hand, do not. In fact, they actually enhance the flavor in a positive way. And color, especially like red pepper. Oh, red, yellow, orange peppers. Just explode with color in the eggs. So, what's Robert saying? There is a lot of money to make in social movements to control the narrative. Problem, reaction, solution, control the choices. Yep. Stay safe. Yeah, thanks, Robert. No, I'm good. It was a nick. It was just a little nick. Could have been the whole tip, though. Yeah. You guys ever hear the joke about the leper and the prostitute? Anyway, I won't go there with the rest of that. Almost done with onions and almost done with the chat, folks. So when you hear people praising Lincoln and you hear people talking about secession, the thing that you need to do is you need to ask them, well, how do you feel about Lincoln? If you want to have a Texit, or you want to have a South Dakota exit, or you want, Idaho to form its own republic or whatever area it is, or if you want Florida and Louisiana and Mississippi to break away and join Texas, whatever you want to do, like, that's great, folks. Let's talk about it. But ask them what they think of Lincoln. And if they say, oh, Lincoln was great, then say, well, since you believe in Lincolnianism, then you have to acknowledge that there will never be any kind of exit movement. That secession will forever and eternally be off the table until you change your views on Lincoln. And trust me, that'll open some interesting doors for you by way of conversation. And these are things that I do think that we need to talk about. And honestly, for those of you, and so many of you have heard me say this before, like, I know my channel's not sexy. I'm definitely not Flex. I'm not Sean Reyes. I'm not Chili Castro. I'm not I'm not High Impact Flicks. Here's the deal. I'm not Audit the Audit. I'm not Lackluster. I'm not going out on the street and doing all that much. But this is the heart of my show. This is the heart of my podcast. This is the heart of my channel, is to talk about these things because they're really important. They're vitally important. And we need people to understand them, because this is how we gain our republic back. This is how we get our nation back. And this is, and I use the term nation because I'm just so used to using it with people. And it is that important. It is very important for people to understand these things. And these are conversations that, as hard as they might be, are really hard for people to have. I had a Facebook friend that I've talked to a few times on the phone, but he called me the other day because I posted a meme. Not a meme, excuse me. I made a post on Facebook talking about some of Lincoln's domestic decisions, and he wanted to reach out because he agreed with me. And I'll be right back, guys. Anyway, as I was saying, oh, thanks, Jugs. I really appreciate that. I've been having a rough day, honestly, and that was very kind of you. Let's see how that works. But these are these conversations that we need to be having with people. And when you look at, some of the struggles that I've had since I started the show, in the fights with city councils and school boards and county commissions, and some of my interactions with law enforcement and in person, and there's some of them are on my channel. Some of them are from a channel that I had before I started this channel, where I really started to struggle with law enforcement, but I also started to struggle with local government and the city state, the county state, the school board state, and the state, and the federal state. But when you look around and you see these channels that are out there promoting activism by First Amendment auditing and Second Amendment auditing, when you look at these things, like the armed fisherman, folks, the guy is absolutely just bold as all hell, and I love what he does. But the reason he's having those struggles, and the reason all of us are having the struggles that we're having with accountability with local government, is because we've forgotten so much of this. We've forgotten these things because they've been drummed out of our psyche by the system. Like there's a phrase, and I'm going to screw it up. I can't remember exactly how it goes, but it's basically refers to ancestral and cultural memory. That you have an ancestral memory, you have a cultural memory, and one of the best ways to ruin a people is to take away their ancestral and cultural memory. And here's one more little tangent before I get to the wrap up. When you look at the inception of government mandated schools, centers of indoctrination, that the founder, we all know him as Dewey, but the founder of modern public schools, Dewey, was hell-bent on destroying cultural memory. He was hell-bent on destroying a memory of the Republic and what it was supposed to be for and what it was supposed to stand for. And he was Gramscian. Well, I can't say that because Gramsci wasn't alive. He was very much a student of Marxism. And a lot of people don't want to acknowledge that in the education systems today. But John Dewey was a Marxist. He was, a lot of people say communist. But the reality is that he wanted to destroy the family unit. He wanted to destroy individualism. He wanted to destroy the premise of what the United States was founded on. And I know I'm off camera, you guys are gonna have to bear with me. He wanted to take away people's independent thought. And the best way to do that was first get them away from the influence of the church and the influence of the parent. And I'm actually working on putting together a piece where I compare public schools, government centers of indoctrination, to another phenomenon that arose at the time. So Dewey was an enemy of the family. Dewey was an enemy of cultural memory. He wanted people to forget where the United States started and where it came from and what it was intended to be. And government schools were the point of that. And this is not me advocating for you putting your kid in a Christian school. It's not me advocating for you homeschooling on a Christian curriculum. This is me advocating for so many of the people who watch my content who are thought leaders in their regions, in their local areas. This is me advocating for you to educate your own children, to be involved in the education of your grandchildren, to teach your kids. And if that means you have to pull them out of the government schools, then pull them out of the government schools. You have to do what it takes to get that negative influence of government thought police out of those children's lives, because they're never going to teach them these things. Your kids are going to continue to grow up to hear that Lincoln was the greatest president of the United States because he saved the Union. Your kids are going to continue to grow up and hear that the Southerners were monsters who hated black people. Your kids are going to continue to grow up in the thought process that if the U.S. hadn't fought the Civil War, and by the way, definitionally, wasn't a civil war either. That's why I emphasize the war for independence and the war between the states, or the war of northern aggression. Because neither one of those, the Revolutionary War or the Civil War, are descriptions of what took place here in the North American continent. And maybe we could talk about that again sometime too. But when you leave your kids in a system that is training them to hate everything that you believe in, I don't care if you're left or right. I don't care if you're some sort of fence-sitting centrist who just has no opinions on anything and you just want to be left alone. That's not going to happen if you leave our following generations in the hands of people that hate us. And that's what's happening. Our children are being taught to hate us. Our grandchildren are being taught to hate us. They're being taught to hate the history of this republic. Being taught that the only people who are good and right and proper are the people who did the most to destroy the republic. Men like Dewey, men like Lincoln. They're being taught to excuse terrible and egregious behavior. They're being taught on one hand that a particular form of genocide in a particular part of the world at a particular time in history in the 1940s, 30s and 40s was very bad. And it was. And that slavery was very bad. But they're being taught that another form of genocide is perfectly okay. Or they're being taught that it was right and necessary for Truman to drop the atomic bombs on Nagasaki and Hiroshima. that it was right and okay to drop firebombs on Berlin and Tokyo. I mean, we all are very powerfully and fundamentally aware that he who writes history must first be the victor. And it's time for us to rise up and be the victors. And the only way that we can rise up and be the victors is, one, study history. Two, study and learn these things for ourselves. And then to teach them to others. Lincoln didn't save anything. Lincoln didn't free anyone. Secession is the right of all peoples, anywhere in creation, in all of nature. It is the right of people to rise up and throw off the chains of government oppression at any time. And to do so in as much as it is possible for them to do so peacefully. When the South decided to leave the Republic, it didn't rain fire down on Washington, D.C. When the South decided to leave the Republic, it didn't invade and try to take a bunch of states with it. When the South decided it was done being abused by a strong central force, by a strong central state that had in its mind the monopoly to determine what was right and what was wrong, the South didn't fire a single shot. It just very peaceably and peacefully said, "You are not listening to our grievances. We are breaking the chains that have bound us together because it is what is right and best for us at this time. And so we go in peace, our brothers and sisters." And it was only when a megalomaniacal tyrant whose heart was filled towards hate, or with hate, towards the very people he used as a political weapon to justify his tyrannical actions. It was only him who initiated force. The South wasn't responsible for that. It was Lincoln and those who would not put chains on him and haul him away. I hope that you guys who have heard all of this before will say, "Hey, listen to this guy because I'm not the crackpot," and then they can listen and know that we're all crackpots together. If any of this is new to you, I hope that it sticks in your craw a little bit and makes you say, "What? Maybe I've misunderstood this, and maybe my fight for liberty, maybe my fight for preserving and protecting and defending and keeping the Constitution of the Republic can change by studying this," because I think it has impacted how I approach things. And so I hope it has that same impact on you. I want to read this a little bit and then I'm going to close. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident: that all men are created equal, boy, we've forgotten it. that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among those are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundations on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence, indeed, will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of these states, colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. Look me in the eye and tell me, when you read that Lincoln was right and that we're better off for it. Until next time, fight for your freedom. It is yours. Fight for your liberty. It belongs to you. And Sic Semper Tyrannis.